Hello, I'm Eric Shupps, SharePoint Server MVP and the SharePoint Cowboy here at SharePoint Connections Coast to Coast in San Antonio, Texas.
All right, so here with Eric Shupps with Binary Wave here at the SharePoint Connections Conference, and we were talking earlier about supporting SharePoint, especially in this 2010 version, and wanted to sit down and talk to you guys a little about it, just in the complexities that have evolved over time. So, I mean, Eric, why don't you take us back to even version 1 of SharePoint? What did that mean to support SharePoint? What did it mean to run a farm?
Well, in its earliest incantation, SharePoint was really just a departmental implementation. It was a small server with maybe a SQL database on the back end, and IT was using it, or a project team was using it for something basic and small amounts of collaboration. Support really just meant keeping the server running, making sure SharePoint was up and doing what it was supposed to do, and you didn't put a lot of time or thought or energy into it. As the platform has grown from this small localized implementation, one-off, into this huge enterprise application infrastructure and framework that we have today, we've gone from simple collaboration lists and libraries and dashboards to service applications, multiple farm scenarios, enterprise search, farms that do nothing but search, and all of these features, Office web applications, and everything that SharePoint supports, in addition to an entire framework for building .NET applications and deploying them within the SharePoint framework. So we've gone from this small, localized, to large, really throughout the enterprise, and that's brought a lot of challenges with it in terms of growth and complexity.
Right, so, yeah, I mean, I saw those early farms. Well, the reality is I only saw 2003 farms. Those are the first ones that where I really entered the picture from a SharePoint perspective. But I've seen, even in the 2007 and now in the 2010, farms that have grown from being these couple web heads and a SQL, maybe a SQL cluster, to 35 servers, especially, and even growing larger when you start considering staging environments, when you start considering dev and test as well. And so we're seeing a lot more business coming into rack space, just because people who had been very competent in working with SharePoint up until this point, or at this point, just raising their hands and saying enough is enough. The complexity has gotten too much, because it's even more than just what boxes exist or where do I build a service application farm. I mean, take us into some of the other choices that you have specific to 2010 that create this management challenge for SharePoint.
Well, you have to begin obviously with architecting the proper solution for your environment. And that solution may consist of, as you mentioned, multiple servers. It may consist of multiple servers in multiple geographic locations that all have to share things and keep data in sync. You have considerations around what additional pieces are you plugging in terms of client integration, about Office applications and Visio services and Excel services. So once you've designed an architecture that meets all the needs and the requirements of the business, you then have to ask yourself, how am I going to implement it, and what am I going to do after it's in place? So in most cases, implementation is a matter of bringing in a partner or having an in-house team that's qualified to actually build and deploy and work with the business and put all this stuff in place. In the process of doing so, you have to plan for what happens on day 2 after this is deployed. Right? How do I manage growth in terms of users are going to create new sites and site collections are going to add more content? Are we going to use my sites? How does that get managed? That's a whole nother box of features in terms of social and whatnot in SharePoint 2010 that has to be accounted for. So it's not enough just to say this is what we're going to implement, these are the features turn on. You have to have governance. You have to have a plan, which is all governance really means. Is you have a plan on how you're going to manage this thing and what you're going to do when certain eventualities occur, what you're going to do when site growth exceeds expectations. How do you know it's growing? And by how much? You have to monitor it. Right? And in monitoring leads to reporting.
And so monitoring doesn't necessarily just mean, is there an error being thrown in the event log?
That's troubleshooting.
That's proactive troubleshooting. Maybe.
So monitoring begins with, what are my servers doing? How much data am I processing? What's my performance like? What's my utilization levels like? looking at those reports on a day-to-day basis, and sometimes even an hour-by-hour basis, to see what's actually happening in my farm environment. Somebody has to be on top of that.
Yeah.
It's not something you can just say, we'll wait for someone to call the help desk. It's not that simple. You have to get out in front of this thing or it's going to overwhelm you, and this great tool that you gave to users, one of two things is going to happen. It's either going to die on the vine and nobody's going to use it, or people are really going to be upset and it's going to put off a big negative vibe because you put it out there and then you didn't put any management processes in place.
You didn't plan for its success.
It's the same thing as saying, we're going to hire 5,000 employees, but we're not going to hire any managers. That is simply not going to work.
No.
You have to have someone to organize them into teams, give them goals, make sure they're productive, monitor their performance and their deliverables.
Sure.
And there has to be a chain of command so that someone's making decisions that then get implemented. SharePoint's exactly the same way. Somebody has to be responsible for this beast.
Right.
You have to have people responding to the users and the issues that, let's not forget, this is a very complex product.
Yeah.
Users aren't used to having, I don't know, just the ribbon in a web application. There's a giant sea change for you. There's a lot of complexity going on this page. A typical SharePoint page now looks like a Word document did back in 2000.
Very,
right?
very true.
All these menus and the stuff going on. Where do I put what where? What's a content type? How do I apply permissions? What did it go into the recycle bin or didn't go into recycle bin? How do I get it out? End user support.
Right.
Get a platform support, infrastructure support, and then your overall governance plan.
That's a lot of people. So when Microsoft comes to sell it, and I've been through a lot of these scenarios where we work with larger organizations, I've been on the receiving end of a lot of this. This is not a message that people receive a lot. This is not, because it's a hard ROI to figure, right? So when they come in, they're trying to justify licensing expense and maybe a person or two to handle servers, some training dollars, which oftentimes they'll throw in. So really, is this a day one activity? Is it a day 50 activity? Where does it fall in? Because there's a justification period or point that has to be reached, I think.
It begins with, on day one, having a plan.
Okay.
It doesn't necessarily mean you need a team of bodies on day one, because you may only go live with 500 users or 1,000 users to an eventuality of 30,000 users 24 months down the road.
Sure.
You don't necessarily need to bring in a SWAT team on day one to handle this thing, but you need to have a plan for growth. You need to know in your organization how many users and how many farms equates to a full-time support resource. What we've discovered is, based on the different organization types and whatnot, a baseline metric is we find that about 5,000 users equals one full-time support resource.
5,000 to 1.
Now that obviously may vary. If you have very heavy ECM utilization or people doing a lot of Excel services, it could be 500.
What about 500 lawyers?
Yeah, well, yeah. So that's it can definitely change in a situational environment. But as long as you have a plan, and you know we're going to have end user support, how are we going to deal with it? Is our help desk trained? Do they have the scripts? Do they know what to do? Do we have self-help support resources? Do we have a knowledge base, right, to go to for common issues? Just Googling or binging around isn't going to get you the answer.
Sure.
You want things that you know are going to work in your environment, common answers, common problems, and that varies from customer to customer. To be fair to Microsoft, they're in the job of selling software.
Fair enough.
Right? They will advise you of the issues that you may encounter, and they'll be the first to tell you need to build a team and center of excellence and those sorts of things. But it's up to the individual customer to determine what's right for their needs.
That's right. But I really was poking at the point that while Microsoft will let you know, it's still your responsibility to have that plan, and having that plan is unlike any plan they've had to have for a product before. I mean, CRM was always just CRM. Accounts payable is just always accounts payable inside of Great Plains or whatever that might have been.
Sure.
This is something that reaches across every aspect of the organization, and so find the help when you're considering larger products. And you may know think that you're a year away from this type of a scenario, but start those conversations now. I mean, Eric's contact information is here. He has a company that does that, Rackspace. We provide a lot of these, but not all of these services. There are other companies out there who do this stuff. But when choosing somebody to do this sort of work or to develop that plan for you, or even to help with staff augmentation in that area, check those references. I mean, SharePoint is the new buzzword. We'll call it, we'll call it 10 years ago, everybody put, .NET developer because .NET developing was cool. Not that it's not now, but it was what was in. So it was on everybody's resume, both corporate and individual. So SharePoint's on everybody's resume now.
It is very true, and it's very challenging one of the advantages of working with a outsourced provider like Rackspace or Binary Wave is that we vet those candidates, and we're always bringing the top level resources. It's very difficult for a company who doesn't have deep SharePoint expertise to know the difference between a paper tiger and someone who really has solid qualifications. So obviously you want to look for certifications, but more importantly you want to look for experience. Look for someone, I prefer to look for people who have experience in the previous product cycle, so they've done 2003 or 2007, and they're moving into the 2010 framework, which is obviously still new, but I like this for people to have had real world field experience. They can draw on their interaction with customers who can look ahead and know when things are going to happen so that they can plan for that. It's a challenge, to be sure. The labor market is tight. There aren't a lot of people who are quote-unquote experts in this field, but there are a lot of people out there that are providing those type of staff log services and tech staffing services that can help you recruit and retain those type of people. I think the number one thing you have to do first, though, is you have to get an expert in to help you build a plan. Get a plan in place, whether it's an internal expert or an external expert. Get somebody in to help you build that plan so that you're prepared as your organization grows.
That's right. So be prepared. And all the usual suspects. Check the references. Make sure they've done the work before. You can always call or email or Twitter us. We'll tell you if they're good guys or bad guys. You know, it's a pretty small community.
That's true.
Some call it an inbred community, but at any rate, Eric, thanks for taking some time to visit. You know, this area is evolving, it's getting bigger, and it's not going to shrink.
It is absolutely not. So if you haven't started to plan already, please start planning now. Reach out to the community. One of the great things about the SharePoint community is we're very dynamic. We're happy to help you. Come to events like the events we're having here. Go to a local user group. Ask your SharePoint folks in your community how they're doing it and how they're dealing with the situation. But don't let it fester. Don't wait. It will rear its ugly head and cause you a lot of difficulty. Plan now for the growth that's coming.
Right. So speaking of community, how can they find you?
You can find me at SharePointCowboy.com. You can email me at eShupps@BinaryWave.com or at Twitter/eShupps.
Great. Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, sir.